Good morning. Today is the 17th day of Tishrei, the third day of Sukkot, and I honestly think it's the 2nd of October. I hope I'm right. Um, and we're going to be doing the parsha this week. Vezot bracha. This is the blessing. It's the final parsha of the entire Pentateuch, and it is mostly made up of the blessing that Moses gave to the different tribes. There's one tribe that notably he doesn't mention, Shimon. He mentions him only in passing when he blesses Judah. But that was in yesterday's reading, so we're not going to get a chance to look at that, I think. Maybe in the rest of the week somehow. So we're up to the second reading. The second reading is the blessings for the tribes of Levi, the Levites, which is a long blessing, and then one verse for the tribe of Benjamin. Let's start with Levi and look at his blessing. So it says, I'm going to read with the translation, referring to the tribe of Levi. Moses said, "Your Tumim and Urim." What are the Tumim and Urim? So that's famous. That's on the shield of Yale University. They have Urim and Tumim there. What are the Urim and Tumim? They were the one opinion is that it refers to the breastplate that the high priest carried on his breast. Breastplate was actually quite small. It wasn't bigger than this. It was about this big, and it's not very big. Um, the other opinion is that it's not the breastplate itself, but Rashi's opinion is that the Urim and Tumim were actually a scroll with God's names that was placed inside the breastplate. And sort of like one way of thinking about it is it's like hardware and software. That there is the hardware is the breastplate and the software is the scroll that was put inside. I think I may have mentioned this years ago. I read a very interesting science fiction story. Somebody tried to describe what might have been an alternate development of technology. Our technology today is based on hardware being made out of silicon mostly, doped, which means that yeah, areas that are positive and areas that are negative, and that way we create transistors, and then we connect all these transistors together, and we something like a computer, or and then we add software to it. An alternate direction of using silicon or using clay in the science fiction story, which was a very interesting idea, was that you would create like a golem, like a type of, I guess, like the shape of an automaton. It could be anything, maybe the shape of a toaster, and then you would add a scroll into it. And then he had this whole thing that if you would take the story about the golem seriously and as a historical fact, that somehow there is a possibility of animating clay by just adding a scroll into it. So that way you could get a whole different world of technology of clay that does things just by adding a scroll into it. That's the idea of the Urim and Tumim. In a certain sense, this would create a market for people who knew the names of God. That was the way that he described this. It was very interesting. But if you want to take it into something that's more realistic and actually does have bearing on our lives today, so we started by saying that this is the Urim and Tumim are in the shield of Yale University. Why is it there in the first place? So the thinking in Yale was always that we are adding the spirit into the golem. And who is the golem? The golem is the United States. In other words, that you have a very big structure that is taking care of millions of people, the whole infrastructure of the United States. And you need someone who has the Urim and Tumim. And again, this is according to Rashi's opinion, that it's an extra scroll. So you need somebody who has a vision about what does it mean for this golem to actually come to life. meaning you can have a bureaucracy that is spiritless, that doesn't have any humanistic touch to it. But you have to have a direction that comes from the Urim and Tumim. You have to have a direction that comes from the spiritual aspect, which was part of the whole idea behind Yale University. Originally, it was a theological idea, but as the centuries moved on, 18th century, it switched actually to looking for what are the most inspiring elements in the Torah that would add a spirit to the United States. Now, this all seems very far-fetched, but this has actually been researched to a great degree. One of the things people probably don't know is that Yale University was the first place in the entire Americas to purchase a Zohar, the classic text of Jewish mysticism, the Zohar. The first place that acquired one was actually in the early 1700s. They sent Benjamin Franklin to the old world, back to Europe, on one of his trips, and asked him to purchase a copy of the Zohar to bring back to Yale University. So Yale became the first place in the entire Americas, North and South, to possess a Zohar, and it was studied profusely. If you actually look at the portraits of the seventh, I believe all the eighth presidents of Yale University, the ones who had procured the Zohar, you see that their portraits, the official portraits at the university itself, are full of Kabbalistic symbols. And the way that they saw this, it wasn't like some kind of, shall I say, like some kind of, they weren't trying to delve into magic. They were really looking for, and this was why Benjamin Franklin played along with this, they were looking for the humanistic elements in the Torah, and they believed, and I think they were right, and they believed that they could find it in the mystical tradition in the Zohar itself. So Moses says to Levi, your Tumim and Urim come to your man of loving kindness. Who is this? This is the high priest. And the high priest has exactly that function in the Jewish people. His function is to add the humanistic educational element. Priesthood was responsible during the time of the first and even in the second temples for the education of the people. In the second temple, this became corrupted in many ways. Whenever you hear about the Sadducees in the second temple period, that they were running the temple, but they weren't just using the temple as a way to levy taxes through the sacrifices that were brought. They were using the temple also as a way to educate the people. They had a tremendously strong influence, and that's why the simple folk in the beginning, the common people, were very much connected to them, because they were not only giving them the services of sacrificing the animals that they needed to sacrifice. At that time, to sacrifice an animal was almost like sort of like a necessary service that you needed to receive from someone, because you couldn't do it yourself, and you felt that that was your connection with God. So it was almost like somebody offering prayers on your behalf. But they didn't just do that. They also were responsible for the education. So they, and through the office of the high priest, but especially in the first temple, were the ones responsible for making sure that people had a basic education. And one of the things we see is that if someone had killed slaughtered someone, killed someone by mistake, in error, did not mean to kill them, the person would be sent to a city of refuge, and they could only leave when the high priest that was in office when the murder occurred had passed away. It was all dependent on the high priest. Why? Because the high priest was considered to be the one responsible for the spiritual well-being of the people. So this is the blessing that Moses is giving them. Tumecha v'orecha li'ish chasidecha, the tumim and urim, the spirit behind the entire infrastructure of the people belongs to the high priest. And you tested him in Masa, teriveu al mei meriva, and you quarreled with him, he says to God, on the waters of Meriva. What is he referring to? He's referring, of course, to the incident where Moses and Aaron both went to bring out water after Miriam had passed away, and the water, the well that had been Miriam's well was gone. They had to find water. And God told them to go speak to a certain stone or a certain boulder. And instead of speaking to it, Moses hid it. He struck the boulder twice until it gave water. But the punishment was not just administered to Moses, it was given to Aaron also, even though Aaron wasn't in practice. He didn't do anything practically. He just stood there by Moses. And as Rashi says here, all he did was he didn't stop him from striking the stone, meaning he didn't warn him that he's doing the wrong thing, but he didn't actually actively do anything. But again, that is the role of the educator. The role of the educator is not just to proactively ensure that those trusted to him have a proper upbringing in Torah and in understanding of other people and in the proper behavior and so on. He also has to be able to warn against actions that are wrong. If he can't do that, then God quarrels with him upon that. His responsibility is much greater than anyone else's because he's entrusted with the very spirit of society. Now, this also means, and now we're going to take a little bit out of context and end with this second verse. He says to his father and his mother, I haven't seen you. And he doesn't recognize his brothers, looking now at verse 9 in chapter 33. And his sons, he does not acknowledge because he keeps your word and entrusts your covenant. And the idea is that when someone is entrusted with this very important task of being the educator, he can't see his own family before others. And there's a very famous story about this from Chassidus, about Reb David of Lelov. He's also a hero of Sukkot to a degree. He has a famous story about him in Sukkot, but we won't tell it right now. Reb David was known, he was one of the disciples of the Baal Shem Tov. He was known to feel that he should have the same compassion for someone else's son that he has for his own. It should be exactly the same. And there was one time that his son was very sick and hardly recovered. And after he recovered, he literally sat in mourning as if he had died, but the son was fine. He was alive. And he asked him, why are you sitting in mourning? And he says, because I realized now that my son was sick, and I realized how much I was worried about him, that I had not been true to my purpose when I knew of other people's children's sickness. I wasn't able to pray for them with the same intensity, with the same depth that I now prayed for my own son. And he took that as a sign that he needed to do tshuva, that there was something wrong with his conduct. From Reb David of Lelov is a beautiful example of this. We understand that those who are entrusted with education, those who are entrusted with providing the spiritual aspect of life to the people, they need to be able to look at every single child as if it's their own child. They can't look at his relations as being somehow more important. So the whole idea of nepotism in education is something that deteriorates the whole system. So if we go a little bit back to the Sadducees again, So we see that that's exactly what brought down the temple in the second temple period, that they were practicing a type of nepotism between them, and educators are the ones that have to be the most distant from that, because otherwise the entire people suffer and the level of the spirituality goes down to the point where finally everything is unfortunately destroyed. So on that happy note, I'll tell the little story about Reb David of Lelov, since I think we have like a minute or so left. Maybe we don't. I don't have a watch today. So Reb David saved. He was very poor, and he saved all year long for a beautiful citron, for an etrog. And when he came home with the etrog that he had purchased for a tremendous amount of money, and his wife saw it, she got very angry at him. Why did she get very angry at him? She said, "You had that much money, and you went and you spent it on an etrog. How could you do that? We have children, we have to feed them, we have this, we have that." And at that time, the amount of money that he spent was something that they could have done probably the whole holiday with. And she was very upset at him. And she was so upset that she took the etrog out of his hands and she bit the top off. She literally just, and obviously it becomes unqualified for the mitzvah, for taking the four species. So Reb David, as a good educator, he looked at it and he said, he didn't say anything. And he just put it away, and that was it. He didn't say anything anymore. He said he received his punishment, as it were. And probably the year after that, he acted in a more responsible way. The custom, by the way, in those times was that usually the whole village would have a single etrog, and he wanted one for himself. So that type of behavior, he understood, was uncalled for. But even just the fact that he didn't get angry, the next year when he visited the Baal Shem Tov, he said to him that that moment was the greatest test of his life, to see if he would get upset. And the fact that he didn't get upset, he didn't say a word to his wife, he didn't do anything, just put it aside, and that was it. He says, with that, you performed the entire mitzvah, the entire commandment of the four species at the highest level possible in this world. So with that, we'll end today, and God willing, continue tomorrow, regular hours, I hope. All the best, everyone. Chag Sameach. Bye-bye.